she trusted the defendant. Even though they were no longer seeing each other, she trusted the defendant because they had known each other for 1.5 to 2 years. And so that morning, on February 13th, 2023, takes Ilene up, I'm sure, drives off at 8:32 a.m. Ilene had no idea what was. At some point, the defendant lost it. And tragically, Ilene lost her life because of the defendant. Now, the judge just went through all the instructions, and that was a lot. You guys will have the instructions. What I would like to do is just talk about a few of the instructions and highlight a few. First of all, in considering the evidence, you will make deductions, and you'll reach conclusions according to reason and common sense. Use your common sense. You all have it. All your experiences that you've had in life, you will be able to use your common sense in this case. Instruction number 16, I'm not going to read this. This is the state's burden. The state has the burden to prove the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. You have the instruction. What that really means is if the state, if you're firmly convinced that we proved our case in murder in the second degree, then there's no reason to doubt. You're firmly convinced. Instruction number 21. This is where we get into the marshalling instructions. And Mr. Wilbur talked to you about checklists. This is where you have to use the checklist. This is where you have to look at the elements of the crime. We have 3 different offenses. The first, count 1. The state must prove all the following elements of murder in the second degree. On or about the 13th day of February 2023, the defendant assaulted Ilene Gowan. The state proved that. 33 injuries on her body. Ilene Gowan died as a result of the assault. And the defendant acted with malice of forethought. We'll get into malice of forethought. But here is the thing. If you believe Dr. Baden's opinion that she was assaulted and that coat was grabbed and twisted up and choked her, neck compression, and it was held there. And he's guilty of murder in the second degree. Those elements are met.
Excuse me, Mr. Forney, and I apologize for doing that. We've got a full courtroom, and I think you need to keep your voice up because of the media and then full courtroom. Just try to keep the voice a little louder. I want to make sure that Mr. Reedy, as well as other folks in the copy, have the best hearing can hear you. And I don't know if I don't think that mic stretches over there.
I'll speak louder.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I apologize for interrupting you.
Instruction number 22. Murder in the second degree does not require specific intent to kill another person. Malice. What is malice? It's a state of mind which leads one to intentionally do a wrongful act to the injury of another out of actual hatred or with an evil or unlawful purpose. Is assaulting, unlawful. Choking, unlawful. It may be found from the acts and conduct of the defendant. All the acts that the defendant did that we've proven in this case. And the means used in doing the wrongful and injurious act. 33 injuries. 33 injuries. Malice aforethought. This is not a first-degree murder case. The state does not have to prove premeditation. Malice aforethought is a fixed purpose or design to do some physical harm to another which exists before the act is committed. So it's not a reflexive, it's not something like a reflex. There's got to be a thought, but it doesn't have to be long. But if you believe the opinion of Dr. Bogg, that jacket was twisted up. She'd been assaulted or is being assaulted. All the injuries. That coat's being twisted up and it's being held there. And it's being held there for probably at least a minute. If you believe that, then you have malice aforethought. Instruction 37. This is the abuse of a corpse. On or about the 13th day of February 2023, the defendant either hid or buried a human corpse, or failed to disclose the known location of a human corpse. The defendant dumped Ilene's body in a ditch in a remote location where not likely to be found for a while. And at the same time, the entire time that law enforcement, friends, and family are searching for his body, or her body, he is lying to law enforcement. He is not helping them find her. He's doing the exact opposite. He's throwing off the scent. He's making it more difficult to find Ilene. Instruction number 38. The state must prove all the elements of theft. From a theft standpoint, it's really going to be up to you what you decide the amount is. If we've met all the elements, you look at the amount. And the state believes that it's true in this case. The defendant took a safe. The safe has a value. $1,200 in the safe. Other contents in the safe. Purse is gone. Phone is gone. Is that more than $1,500, but not more than $10,000? If it is, and you are the ones that decide. If it is, then that's theft in the second degree. If it's not, and you say it's, well, maybe I think it's more like $1,000. That's theft in the third degree. You are the ones that will have to make that decision based on the evidence that was presented. Instruction 19. I'm just going to highlight the last line, last sentence. If the body of a murder victim is found within the state, the death is presumed to have occurred within the state. The body was found at 152nd and Mormon Bridge Road. That is Potawatomi County, Iowa. Instruction 13. Evidence has been offered to show the defendant made statements at an earlier time and place while not under oath. You saw interviews. You saw videos. You saw a video from February 15th with Sergeant Roberts and Detective Dyer. Roberts conducted the interview. You saw that interview. That's in evidence. You saw another interview from February 17th where Sergeant Roberts and Detective Brannigan interviewed the defendant. There were statements the defendant made there as well. You saw that. That's evidence. There were statements that the defendant made at the welfare check. when Officer Boldra did a welfare check with the defendant, and again, made statements, you have that evidence, that video. Now, you may consider any admission for any purpose, like credibility, right? So, in the first interview on February 15th with Sergeant Roberts, he says, I picked her up from Sugar's at 8:30. I took her to Mike Rockman's house. Then I went back to my apartment. Sometime later, I hear knocking on my window. I think it's her. February 17th, story changes. Sergeant Roberts followed up on that. And Sergeant Roberts figured out he didn't go straight to Mike Brockman's house. No, he must have taken a different route because the video evidence shows something different. Well, February 17th, story changes. Credibility, story changes. It's the admission of the defendant. Now, the defendant picks up Ilene, 8:30, leaves at 8:32. Doesn't go directly to Mike Brockman's house. Instead, went to Dudley Court. Ilene had to pick up a save. Then after we did all that, I took her back to Mike Brockman's house. Dropped her off, never saw her again. Oh, I get a knock on the window. I think it might be her. We did get video evidence from Dudley Court, so now we know they actually did go to Dudley Court. And they also went to Sherwood Apartments to see if she could rent a place. Story number 3. At this time, witnesses have testified that now we know that the defendant has gone into Omaha. We know he's going that direction. And he's confronted about it. Did you go to Omaha? No, I don't remember going to Omaha. Then later, yes, went to Omaha. Went to go get cigarettes. Went to Carter Lake to fool around. Then I took her back to Mike Rocker's house. Dropped her off. Never saw her again. She came knocking on my window. Story changed again. Those admissions, those you can consider that for any purpose in this case. Let's talk about some of the witnesses that did testify in court over this last week. Nicole Shipman. Nicole, she is the daughter of Ilene. Nicole last spoke with her mom at 8:06 a.m. while her mom was at Sugar's. Her mom had just finished her cleaning shift. This was on February 13th, 2023. She always keeps in contact with her mom. She has great communication with her mom. Didn't have any communication with her later that day, and something wasn't right, because that's not like her mom. On the 14th, she reports her missing. She says, I've got to go with the law enforcement. We've got to report this. Report is made on February 14th. The defendant and Ilene also both lived with Nicole. So Nicole knows that relationship very well. And I believe she talked about it being an off and on again. It was unhealthy. But she knew the relationship well. She also witnessed her mom accessing her safe. And that's important because she testifies about the safe, but she testifies about how her mom opens the safe. It's a key. It's not a combination, it's a key. She uses a key to open up that safe, which is an important detail. And she also talks about Ilene when she went to go purchase a diamond stud earring. And that diamond stud earring was for the defendant, Ilene Brammer. It was cinnamon. There's the diamond stud earring, 17B. We'll come back to another slide, but with Justin Brammer is the son of the defendant. Justin Brammer also happens to be in a relationship with Nicole, so they live together. Justin had some important testimony. He did talk about the fact that his dad told him the story about picking Ilene up from Sugar's and driving straight to Mike Brockman's house. So that corroborates some of the evidence that you've heard. He also talked about the defendant not dropping Ilene off in the driveway because some black hose was in the driveway. But what he also testified to was the fact that although he has his dad's tools and stores them, and now he considers them his, Justin's, he never sold his dad's tools and never gave his dad money from selling those tools. $225. The defendant takes that sentimental earring while Ilene is missing and pawns it for $160. Ilene Brammer testified. Emily is the granddaughter of the defendant. The defendant and Ilene at one time lived with her at Cottonwood Apartments. The defendant and Ilene broke up. Ilene moved out. It was just the defendant and Emily in Cottonwood Apartments. So the defendant and his granddaughter are living at Cottonwood Apartments. She testified that when they broke up this time, it was final. That was it. It was final. She also testified that when Ilene was missing, she saw the defendant with Ilene's phone. And she described the phone with a pink case. And she further stated that she knew that phone because she had held that phone before in her hand. The defendant also told Emily, his own granddaughter, to lie to law enforcement if they asked her about crushing the truck. She testified about some of the behavior of the defendant during the period that Ilene was missing. He was angrier. He drank more. He lost weight. He quit his job. And she called in the welfare check because the defendant was making suicidal statements and she was concerned about her grandfather. Officer Boldrin was the officer that went and did the welfare check. And you saw that video. What's interesting about that video, a few things, but the most interesting thing about that video is the fact that the defendant talks about Ilene being raped on February 10th, which was the Friday before she went missing. And yet, his story is that on Monday, he went and dropped Ilene off at Mike Brockman's house, the supposed individual that raped her.
He talked on the phone. My name's Ted Robinson. So I really got you. Yeah. I'm the last person to see her alive. I didn't say that. Yeah. I didn't say that. I said you were the last person that saw her before she went missing. So that's why it was important for us to talk to you. You said that on the phone. I said, no, I didn't. I want to.
Megan Preston testified. Megan Preston is the owner of Sugar's. Sugar's is a restaurant bar that is 2.5 miles away from Mike Brockman's house. Sugar's is the place where the defendant worked. Ilene worked there as well. And even Mike Brockman was a person that went there and drank sometimes. What Megan testified to was that Ilene came and worked her shift that morning, February 13, 2023, and she did a good job. There was no issues with the shift, and she had no observations of Ilene being anything but normal. She states that she's a reliable worker, and she's a good communicator. There was a message, and this is in evidence, Exhibit 16, from approximately 2:44 p.m. Megan, who has Ilene in her phone as Ilene Cleaning Lady, Megan worked that shift, and she was ready to go home. And Ilene was supposed to show up at 2 o'clock for a shift, but she never showed. So she's sending messages. She's trying to find where Ilene is because she needs Ilene to come in. At 2:20, she sends a text message to Ilene saying, "Where are you?" And the response back comes at 2:44, "I'm done, leave me alone." She testified that that's all. That kind of response. Sam Brammer's communicating with Megan as well on Exhibit 16B. Again, Megan's trying to figure out where is Ilene. February 13th at 2:30, Megan sends a message to Sam Brammer, Facebook Messenger. "You don't have to respond, but I was wondering if you knew where Ilene was." His response back, "No, ma'am. She texted me. Sounds like she was drunk." Megan also provided video for us. She testified to that. She provided video that shows the defendant pulling up to Sugar's and Ilene leaving with the defendant at 8:32 a.m. in the morning. She also provided video that shows Ilene walking in at around 8:30 into the entrance of Sugar's, and she appeared to be walking normally. She also provided video of Mike Brockman coming down later at night and dropping off Ilene's belongings, just like he testified to. Megan also testified about something that was a little odd, and that was that on 2/16, when the defendant was supposed to work his shift, that he was just sitting out in his truck in the parking lot, or in a vehicle in the parking lot. And he was supposed to be working his shift. And he never does come in and work the shift. Mike Brockman testified. Mike Brockman, straight shooter. He said he allowed her to stay a couple days. Videos from shooters corroborate his story. Everything that he said is corroborated. Dropped her off in the morning. She worked her cleaning shift. She was supposed to come back and pick her stuff up. She never did. Mike Brockman worked a full day of work on 2/13. Worked a full day of work on 2/14 as well. Mike Brockman was interviewed by law enforcement. His phone was dumped by law enforcement. And his appointment was verified. His boss, Marcia Delahoy, came in and testified to Mike Brockman working those 2 days. And moreover, she testified that when he would run to go get parts, that he would only be gone to 30, 40 minutes at a time. Mike Brockman had no relationship with Ilene. He was just helping her. Carol Martin is Mike Brockman's landlord. She lives 2.5 miles away from Sugars, out on Railroad Highway. She lives on a small little farm. She's got horse stables there. Mike Brockman rents the bottom space of her house. He has his own entrance in the back, like she testified to. First of all, she had no idea about a black hose in the driveway. There was never a black hose in the driveway. And she also said that when strangers come to her property, her dogs bark. And she was there in the morning on February 13th, 2023. The defendant is saying that he's dropping Ilene off at Mike Brockman's house that morning. This evidence is to the contrary. Sergeant Roberts. Sergeant Roberts was the lead investigator in the missing persons case. So this started off as a missing persons. And he was the one that first spoke with the defendant. He was the one that was following up on the report that Nicole had made, my mom was missing. He interviews the defendant on 2/15, which is less than 2 days from when she goes missing. And when he interviews the defendant, there's a portion of that very beginning of that video where the defendant comes in and tries to say that the officer, Sergeant Roberts, said that he was the last person to see her alive.
Sergeant, he talked to me on the phone. My name's Ted Roberts. I'm a sergeant. I was the last person to see her alive. I didn't say that. Yep. I didn't say that. Yes, you did. Yeah. You sure did. I said you were the last person that saw her before she went missing.
Last person to see her alive. It's been gone for 2 days. The defendant is saying that because he knows he's already murdered her. No one else is talking about alive after 2 days. Use your common sense. We don't think someone's dead after 2 days.
If you could, I just need to know what went on Monday morning. What happened Monday morning with you? Tuesday, I think. Okay. people at work, I can't remember their names, so I didn't. I just went real little mean to Eileen. I called her neighbor. And the lady that works in the back in the kitchen, I called her Kendra. Those are the two that she was going to bring up, those two. Okay. So I got there, and I said, I'll be there in a minute. She was going to come inside. I don't want Megan to know that we're back, or you're with me. I said, okay. And I pulled up, she goes to the truck. We came out, right out to this, can't remember the guy's name now. Those are the one that tried to do something with her. And dropped her out there. Then I left. And then, wasn't too long after that is when she called me. I think she was at my house knocking. See, you can't get in my apartment building unless you have a key to get in. But I think she was knocking. I didn't look, I didn't care. I just wanted to lay down and take a nap. That's when she texted me, wanted to know if I could talk with him about letting her move back in. Because this guy raped her. Now, there's two rapes her when? The night before Monday? The night before Monday, yeah. Okay. And I don't know if it was true or not. I don't know if she was just saying that. She did. We put her right away. I don't know.
Defendant says when he drops her off at my progress, goes back to his apartment, and then he receives a text from Eileen. A text from Eileen. Eileen is somewhere else. He's at his apartment. We'll come back to that. Sergeant Roberts followed up and realized that this isn't a hiccup. We need a second interview. There's something not right about this. I'm trying to corroborate his story, and videos aren't corroborating the story. Detective Dyer, he was part of this interview. Detective Dyer, I don't recall him asking a single question, but he was there. But Detective Dyer came in and testified. Detective Dyer went and picked up the defendant and brought him to the station to do the interview on February 15th, clip that you just saw. And after the interview was over, Detective Dyer takes the defendant back to Cottonwood, back to his place, where he lives, his apartment. And one thing that Detective Dyer notices that caused attention is that the defendant, when he gets out, he walks directly over to the dumpster and just looks into it and then walks away. When you start looking at some of the other evidence that you've seen in this trial, where you saw the video of the defendant coming back from Trainer, going straight to his apartment on February 13th, arrives around 1 o'clock, gets out his truck, starts taking stuff over to the dumpster, putting stuff in the dumpster. This is 2 days later. The defendant's checking to see if that stuff is still in the dumpster. Detective Ron Brannigan. We had a lot of testimony from Ron Brannigan. He was ended up being the lead detective in this case. What Ron really did is he gave us the timeline. He tracked the defendant's truck, and we learned about the movements of the defendant with Eileen on the morning of February 13th. And pretty much through video, through intersection cameras, through private businesses, track the movements for the day, which also tell a different story than what the defendant had told law enforcement 3 different times. What we do know and what you have as evidence is that after leaving Sugars at 8:32 a.m. with Ilene, and we have an exhibit where Ilene is in the truck, and you can see her at 8:32 a.m. Law enforcement tracked the defendant's truck movements, and we know at approximately 9:28 a.m., instead of the defendant's vehicle going up to Mike Brocklin's house, what we know is that after Dudley Courts, that this vehicle is heading towards Omaha. And this is at 9:28. So the vehicle's going westbound. And there's a gap there. There's about a 58-minute gap where we don't know. We don't know exactly. We don't have any surveillance. So we don't know exactly where he's at in the vehicle. But we know Eileen's with him when he's going that direction. And we also know that from Dudley Court's videos, you see her walking through in the entrance up to her mom's apartment, down the hallway, back down the hallway again, and out of the building, and was alive and was walking just fine. You saw that with your own eyes in the video. And she was carrying a black safe. What we also know, and what you saw as evidence, is you saw the defendant's vehicle come back into Council Bluffs at 10:26 a.m. And we had some images where it appears it's Ilene in the passenger side, but those images were hard to get a lot of detail from, but you could tell that someone's in there. And what we also know is that at 10:30 a.m., the defendant goes through Burger King drive-thru. And you have a video of that. And you've seen the video. And we have a couple photos that are in evidence as well, and you can see that as well. And through the entire video, it's not a long clip, but it's long enough to see the defendant exchanging money with the individual working for Burger King. But when you focus on Ilene, she doesn't move. Not at all. And the only thing you can see moving in that video is two things. Defendant moving his arm out to exchange with the teller at the window, but you can see his chest and his body pounding through his chest. You can see it in the video. He has already assaulted her. He doesn't know what to do with her. And then, of course, we've got the defendant eastbound heading out to Trainer, 14 miles away from Council Bluffs. And we know he's out there because we have video of it. Have him going out and have him coming back. Never in any of the stories up to law enforcement going to Trainer. Not once. In fact, when he's confronted about it, didn't have an explanation for it. His story was conforming as law enforcement confronted the defendant about some of the other surveillance footages. In knowing his location, his story kind of changes to conform with it. Like, for instance, I wasn't in Omaha. Well, we have you in Omaha. Okay, well, yeah, maybe I was in Omaha. 4 aces getting cigarettes. Story conforms. When asked about Trainer, there was nothing. And then, of course, he comes back to Cottonwood Apartments around 1 p.m. and he pulls into his normal parking spot. and we have a pretty lengthy video of the defendant dumping items into the dumpster and then just in his truck for several minutes. Carrying a bag that's got an item in it, and it's a safe. And he's walking over to the dumpster, and he dumps it in the dumpster, and then he walks back with what? A bag. Got rid of it, came back to his truck. Officer Wright, he testified that he was the one that pursued the defendant on February 21st when the defendant was with his law enforcement. You saw the video of it. You saw the defendant. Eventually, the defendant was arrested on February 24th. But importantly, the truck. You got to see a video of the truck. And you got to see a vehicle that appeared to be running just fine. Didn't see any smoke coming out of it. In fact, the vehicle was running well enough that law enforcement didn't even keep up with it. Come back to that. Sergeant James Doty. Sergeant James Doty testified that reported to be $1,200 in Ilene's black safe. He also interviewed the defendant, and the defendant admitted that there was between $600 and $700 in the safe. Sergeant Doty also followed up on the bank deposit. And 2 days after her disappearance, a $1,200 cash deposit went into his bank. You saw the video. You saw the evidence of it. There's a deposit slip for it. $215, $1,200. Defendant told law enforcement that he sold some tools on Facebook Marketplace. You already heard from Justin. He didn't sell any tools for his father on Facebook. He didn't sell any tools for his father and give him any money. Going back to the truck, Sergeant Doty also verified that the truck was, in fact, crushed. Lakeside Recycling. Interestingly enough, when the defendant was arrested On February 24th, law enforcement, they did a little walk around his truck just to see if there was anything damaged in the truck. The officer testified they didn't go get DNA, they didn't try to find any blood or anything. They were just looking to see if there was some kind of altercation in the truck. Appeared to be normal, they didn't do anything else with it. Defendant gets arrested, goes to jail, bonds out the next day, and what does he do? He goes and crushes his truck. A truck that appeared to be running fine in the video that you saw, and he crushed it for $750. Remember how I said use common sense? $750 he crushes his truck for. And wants to make sure the truck is crushed. Sergeant Doty also, as he arrived on the scene, when law enforcement found the body, or when law enforcement came to the scene, the body was found on February 26th. Sergeant Doty was also the one that was able to verify that those are the clothes that this body appeared to be the same clothes as Ilene when she went missing on February 13, 2023. So he was able to connect the missing persons case to the deceased body that was laying in a ditch 2 weeks later out at 152nd and Old Norman Bridge. Zach Norman, Deputy Zach Norman, he was first on the scene, and he secured the scene. He's the one that called Sergeant Doty, and he testified as to his observations of the body, and his observation was there was some kind of ligature or mark on her neck. CSI Hadley Cava, she came out and took pictures of the deceased body. She also took pictures of the area, and this was in fact an area where a lot of people do dump their trash. It's a remote location. You heard testimony from Special Agent Nathan Houck. He was the FBI individual that presented the CASP report. And there was a lot of information on that, a lot of technical information. But what we can distill from it is that both phones were together on February 13th. They were traveling together as well. And we would expect to see that in the morning, because we know from the evidence that the defendant is traveling. We know the defendant picks up Ilene, and they're traveling together. And we know his direction at this point, so we expect to see the phones at that point. But what we also learn is that the phones are together and traveling together when they're not supposed to be together. Remember the evidence. The defendant says he dropped her off at Mike Brockman's. He goes to his apartment. At some point she texts him. Why are the phones together the entire time? Because he has her phone. And they're traveling together. And this evidence shows that. Interestingly enough, both phones go off network at the same time when they go to trainer. So her phone is with his phone, when they go to Trainer, which is 14 miles away from Council Bluffs. And they're both, coincidentally, not able to communicate with the cell tower. Special Agent House said, well, all I do is deal with phone records. All I can say is that maybe they're roaming. Maybe it's airplane mode. Or maybe the phones are shut off manually. Detective Clark came in. He has different information. He doesn't have phone records, but he has the phone dump, the phone itself, the details from the phone. Because we got the phone information. And he did an extraction on that phone. And what we learned from his testimony is that when they're in Trainer, his phone is manually shut off and manually turned back on at the exact same times that the CAS report showed them going off the network in the CAS report. So now we know the answer for the defendant's phone. We don't have Ilene's phone. We don't have Ilene's phone. We're able to get her records from the provider, but we don't have her phone. But we have the defendant's phone, so we know at least the defendant's phone was manually shut off during that period that he went into Trainer and then came back through Trainer. Dr. Kelly Cruz. What did we learn? Good techniques. Good procedure. Good documentation. Good supplemental testing. It was a good autopsy. Dr. Cruz says the body just doesn't tell me enough. It doesn't tell me enough to support the conclusion of cause or manner of death. But she also testified that she's maybe only had 5 to 10 asphyxiation cases. Dr. Bodden, on the other hand, he agrees with the mechanisms. They both agree on the mechanism. They both agree on the physical findings. But he believes the body tells a different story. He's done over 20,000 autopsies, and he's also done hundreds of asphyxiation cases. You have 2 opinions. There's actually 3 opinions, and it's the most important one. It's yours. Those 2 doctors, experts, don't have all the facts. You do. Count 1. We, the jury, find the defendant, Ivan Samuel Brammer, guilty of murder in the second degree. We're asking you to find him guilty. Count 2. Asking you to find Ivan Samuel Brammer guilty of abuse of a corpse. And count 3. Asking you to find the defendant guilty of theft. More than $1,500, but not more than $10,000.